Hi, everybody. Welcome to our podcast. And today we have Allene Symons. I'm so excited to meet you and talk with you today. And we have Marianne. So, welcome to Untangling Alzheimer's and Dementia.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful to be here with you.
Great. Marianne, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Everybody
Excellent.
else too? Yeah. We're recording this in late August and then we're getting late August weather here in New York.
I think this is one of the few times where I'm not the only one who got up early because we're East Coast, West Coast today. All right.
Yeah.
Um, but we're excited to talk to Allene Symons about her book, Love in a Time of Caterpillars, a memoir of monarchs and caregiving, which is
Mm.
such a provocative title and tells us just a little bit about what we'll hear. So, Allene, do you want to kick us off and kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and your dementia journey and with your husband, Alan, and how you came to write your book?
Well, thank you. And yes, he's no longer with me at this
Okay.
point. I lost him about
Sorry.
4 years ago, going
Mhm.
on 4 years. But even without him, I feel connected with a sense of purpose, as in writing this book and
Yeah.
continuing to talk to people about the journey. It's just amazing to me how, just in casual conversations, people who don't even know I have a book yet would say that they're involved in dementia caregiving. Excuse me. And I'm not intrusive about it, but so very often I become engaged with them and make suggestions and feel like I can be helpful.
Yeah.
So, so that's kind of the inception of it. And in a way, it helps me stay connected with him after these years as time goes on. And part of the sharing that I feel I'm doing with the book, I guess you could say I learned it a little bit by being part of a support group where I
Mm-hmm.
learned through Alzheimer's support group that you share, you learn, you solve problems together. And that was kind of a helpful model that kind of got me started on this journey, the writing side of the journey. So that's how it began. It started with keeping track in a journal of his behavior and health issues. And then that pretty soon turned into a journal for me as I
Right.
coped, as I coped. And I'd used journals at some other times in my life when I was going through crises, and I found it could make me feel more objective. I could kind of stand back and give myself advice, like, don't do that
Mhm.
again, or that worked. So that kind of evolved into keeping a lot of notes over 4 years. And that turned into my book, into my memoir.
Yeah. And we hear that a lot, and I think it's such a great thing. I'm so glad we're hearing it again, that just the simple act of journaling can be so comforting for someone as they are going through this. And it's not uncommon to hear people say, well, I was trying to keep track, and then that's what led me to my own kind of healing was being able to write this out. There's such a great purpose involved in that. So that's wonderful. Can you tell us about the butterflies then, too? How does this figure in?
Well, we had a kind of our family hobby, Alan and I, of tending a butterfly garden in our backyard, specifically for monarch butterflies, for about 4 years before the onset of his dementia. So it was already something very much in play for us. And it extended into a kind of therapy and continuing the joy and the hopefulness of these little critters who start out as a tiny little caterpillar and then become these kind of funny little wriggly things and then become a beautiful chrysalis and turn into a beautiful butterfly. And we
Mhm.
have a long season in California, so we were able to enjoy them much of the year. So it went from our hobby into a kind of a therapy, even as the years went by. Up till near the end, there was a point where he wasn't as cognizant, but throughout a lot of the period of his dementia, I could sometimes get a break for him and or for me by just saying, honey, let's go in the backyard and let's find caterpillars. It became like a little Easter egg hunt.
I think that's a really neat hobby and so important for the environment. But yeah, that's really cool.
It seems like it was like a grounding point for you when it's something that he could cling to that was familiar and not forgotten.
That's a nice way of putting it, I think, and that's true.
Mm.
He always would light up. And it also carried through with our caregivers. As I
Mm.
started, we'll probably talk a little bit about the caregiving side, but our final caregiver who became the keeper, the wonderful caregiver, got so involved in the butterflies with us. We'd be messaging each other on off days. It really helped. It became part of their relationship too. And yes,
Mhm.
it was part of feeling that we were helping the planet, helping the migration of the monarchs. And then the way it tied in with my advocacy for helping people with dementia. So I feel it was a gift for me and for both of us.
Yeah. Well, and you had some other challenging things come up for you during this time. Can you talk a little bit about what else was going on for you and share with our audience how you managed through some of your own health crises?
Well, of course, we usually don't think about our own health because we're so focused on caring for our loved one. And just as he was starting to not recognize who I was, just as it was becoming much worse, I was diagnosed with breast cancer and needed surgery.
Mm.
So, going through my mind was, why me? Why now? It was so, and it's the sort of thing you hope that if you have a partner or a mate, that you go through with them. Yet he couldn't comprehend, and he didn't even know I was his wife at that point. It would go in and out. He would sometimes know who I was, and then, who are you? So it was kind of doubly challenging. Also, that I needed my own appointments, and found that when I had to take him with me because I couldn't leave him alone, that became behavioral issues and waiting rooms. Him saying suddenly, I'm going to walk home now, and other kinds of antics. So it was very challenging. I'm just so grateful everything worked out. My stepdaughter came in. She's wonderful and helped out, and our wonderful caregiver. So we got through it. It was right at the beginning of the pandemic. I was probably one of the last surgeries in the area before
Wow.
everything shut down. So it was quite a convergence of, well, what we all go through caring for loved one with dementia is it's never easy. Some moments just things kind of crash together. And then luckily I got through it and I'm doing well. So
That's so great to hear. I'm so glad to hear
thank
that
you.
you're doing so much better. And I mean, it is sort of a cautionary tale that our lives get so focused on the other person that we stop. I mean, not that that was like an instantaneous reaction for you, right? But I mean, just the maintenance kind of care that we might go through would be something we would put on the side at times. So I think that's so
And for
important.
it's just logistics. How do you
Yeah.
get away from the house when you don't want to leave your loved one to make
Exactly.
these appointments? And if you think they're going to go with you, they might just say, as my husband did, I won't go. There you
Mm-hmm.
are, an appointment canceled. So we do have to work those things in. And that, for me, a lot of that did tie in with the caregiving element, having some help.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, as far as your diagnosis goes, was this something that you kind of detected on your own and ended up putting off getting care, or was it just part of like a routine thing that you always did?
No, it was my routine mammogram. It was
Okay,
my
good.
routine care, which I had no expectation of anything being alarming,
Right, right.
which is why why me, why now
Yeah.
reaction.
Well, I can see
Um,
people like even detecting something themselves might try to push that off and make little of it and allow it to continue to grow and become more of a problem while they were too busy caregiving. So again, having regular screenings and keeping up with your physician, especially for things like that, is so important.
yes, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's where I feel like it is sort of the cautionary tale of a routine check. And I know so many people, and we've talked to so many people who just don't have time for themselves. And so those routine checks go by the wayside. And it's so important to remember that we're that person and we're not just, invincible. We have to manage
Yeah.
ourselves. Now, you mentioned your stepdaughter and that she was helpful. And can you talk about that relationship? Were you always close? Was this something that brought you closer?
Well, it definitely brought us closer. We always had a good relationship, but she's, here's in Chicago and I'm in California. So we saw each other, the family vacation once a year, maybe a trip in between. It brought us very close. And it was one of the gifts from this experience for me. We were frequently in touch, especially by email, because I found phone didn't work so well. We didn't want Alan to think we were conspiring against him. So
Mhm.
email was perfect. So I would
Okay.
update her and she'd give opinions and she would sometimes do some research on her end, even though I was very much into the learning curve on my end, especially with my support group, which of course was led by a certified person. So that was a pretty important part of this. Sometimes she and I would work out problem solving together. We had to, the term that's familiar with, I think, for many of us in support groups, Alzheimer's support groups, is the loving lie. That
Mhm.
sometimes we had to work out strategies. For example, when I was trying to get him to stop driving,
Yeah.
we had to kind of work together. And I also worked with my support group on that because everyone faces that. It seems we all face that when we have a loved one with dementia. How do we get them to stop driving? And it isn't usually just it is not a simple thing.
Mm-mm.
So she was great in helping me work that through. On one of her extra trips, she came out. She had a job, she had kids. So it wasn't so easy to come out from Chicago. But she came out once where our kind of plan was the driving thing.
Yeah.
So he's driving, I'm in the passenger seat, she's in the back seat, and we were kind of working out our little scenario there. Oh, Dad, you kind of almost missed that light and different things. So it was very helpful along the way to have her advocacy and, her friendship and her love. It was really important. And I was very fortunate to have
That's
someone like
great.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
makes a difference. I wanted to get back to the whole thing about emails as opposed to phone calls, because some might be something that a lot of people aren't really thinking about, but it's an excellent form of communication for the very reason that you said. It gave you and your stepdaughter the freedom to speak openly and candidly about the situation without fear of your husband overhearing and misconstruing things, like you said. And then at the same time, it also gives you a written record of what's been going on, time stamped, which is really important. And another way people can communicate in that way would be with texting as well. Text
Mhm.
messaging is very, really good for that. And even having something like some of these tools, like we use Slack, is a good one, or to have some kind of like private Facebook group if you wanted to go that way. And then you could allow other people connected to your situation to also be
Mhm.
in. And it gives you the opportunity. I mean, in your case, it was just two people, but if we're a whole family, say, like Christy had a larger family, some families are really huge. The caregiver posts what's happening today, and everybody gets the message, and you're not constantly having to respond to people all day long with calls and texts and emails reiterating the same information. So I really appreciate you bringing that up because that's something I don't think a lot of people think about.
Yeah. And I would, to add on to that, my experience too was, and I've had this experience when someone calls to tell you things, you might be distracted, but an email you can go back to.
Mhm.
In a phone call, you're going to hear it for a little bit, and then you may be, like I said, distracted, but you also, the information may be hard to hear, maybe things you don't want to hear, and you can go back to an email and digest it again when you're ready. So I think that the documentation, the fact that, oh, I think it's important to realize, like you said, Marianne, you don't have to say it 10 times, right? You've got 10 people to keep
Right.
informed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You
that's a
don't need
lot.
that.
Yeah, there are caregiver apps out there too that allow people to do
Yes,
that.
Mhm.
And
yes,
one of our founders, Jean Lee, her sister lived 1,000 miles away from her. So when she started to see issues with the parents who both had Alzheimer's at the same time, her sister said, keep a journal And then when I come, I'll read the journal. So that's what she did. She kept this notebook and she buried it in one of the kitchen drawers so that nobody would find it, and wrote
Yes.
everything down. And then so she wouldn't forget. So when she spoke to her sister, or her sister came to visit, they would have that as a basis of like the day-to-day, what was happening on a day-to-day level, because you don't remember all of that. And you just know things are not right. But when somebody says, well, explain it, you kind of maybe you don't remember what exactly it was, like an incident or specific behaviors. So that can be really helpful.
Yeah, the group
Yeah.
idea makes sense. Again, for me, it was
Mhm.
just the two of us, but
Mhm.
and a tiny little kind of a connection to this is when I finished this draft, I gave it to Kathy. I wanted to be sure she was okay with it. I wouldn't have
Mhm.
even published this if she wasn't okay, because her relationship was more important to me.
Mhm.
But she completely endorsed it, and I'm grateful for that too, because then I
That is
can
Yeah.
wonderful.
share with others.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Yeah, we
That's,
hear a lot of that with the authors here in our organization, and we also have the ones who published anyway. You know, it's
Which is
like,
true about memoirs in general, since I
mhm,
come out of the book publishing world in my former life. So I know
yeah.
that's
Well, they felt that,
part of the genre. So
yeah, they would feel that, well, these people, they weren't there for me to help me. So, and they would expose that in their story, and they didn't
ouch,
care.
yes,
This is
ouch, but
what
yes.
happened. You weren't there, and I'm not going to allow you to tell me what to do now.
Mm.
and there's a place for all those stories, I think. There's a place for people checking in. I certainly did, but there's also a place for, hey, this is what it is, and relationships get fractured, and here's how it happened. Those are also things that we can learn from. And Allene, you talked about I know you've written some other books. You've been, you say, in the publishing world. And so can you talk a little bit about how was this writing of this memoir different or the same, or what did you learn in this process that was adding to what you already knew, or that sort of thing?
Oh, interesting question. Well, I had three of my nonfiction books had been published before. And so one was historical fiction. Let me backtrack. So two nonfiction on different topics. I had at least the experience of completing a project, which is a very big thing in writing a book. And they'd all involved research. They'd involved interviews and or research. So that part of it, being mindful about the dialogue, the level of speech, even as I was journaling, because I felt so much of that helped in the sharing process, whether it was just the tone, the moment, capturing the moment in a way that was helpful for a future reader. So a little bit of that was in the back of my mind, along with my own therapy and my own tracking of the document, just the moments day to day. So this was very different. I had written a memoir before. There was a tiny bit of memoir element in my last book because I was recounting a period in my childhood when my father was a friend of Aldous Huxley. So there was a little bit of my childhood memories, but mostly it was research and interviews and the documents I brought in. So I think those things kind of helped me move into this genre of writing a memoir. But no, this was a person who kept a journal, like so many of us do. And that was really the core of putting this book together. It's chronological, but it's not chronological. And that there are sometimes echoes of a moment that reappear later. So there was some structuring of how to move around these. I like to call this practical themes, but told in true stories. I think that's the way I structured the book. And I think it makes it helpful. A few people who've read it said it was helpful because each chapter has like its own, what I learned, but also the story of what I experienced. So it's narrative, but it kind of shows my takeaway from that experience. I guess that's a long answer to your question, but
No, it's a great answer. I think that's great. I had a question. I wanted to talk a little bit about COVID and your experience as a caregiver during COVID, because COVID is still going on and people are still being affected. And then on the flip side, you've got people who kind of think that it's over and it wasn't that bad. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I'd just gone through my surgery. Kathy was already nervous because it was out there about having to fly out. She was a teacher. She had to, by the time she got home, she had to go into quarantine herself before she could teach. So we were right on the brink of that when that began. And we had expected by then that Alan, who was becoming, his dementia was becoming quite bad, that he would be going into a long-term memory care, 24/7 care. I couldn't handle it at home any longer. That was the plan. That was the plan. Then the pandemic hit and the long-term care facilities were not taking new patients. I had done all the paperwork. I had paid the initial fees. We had a place picked out, Kathy and I, and the pandemic hit, and he was home for several months longer than he should have been. There are bright moments in my book. Some are funny, some of them are scary, and that was a scary time. He didn't know me. He thought I was an intruder in the home. There was a point just before the pandemic, before the long-term care opened up again, there was a point where I was begging for care at night from the agency because I couldn't be alone with him at night. He would think I was an intruder in the house and I was frightened. So we got through a little bit of time with that. And then the long-term care facility started opening up, and I was so grateful because at that point it was really a scary day-to-day situation in our home. So yeah, and complicated because I'd gone to such steps with a scenario for him to be able to enter a long-term care facility. It was really had to be kind of planned like a little script. But then the one that opened was not that facility. So I had to start over with a whole new scenario to be able to get him to walk in and be under care. So it's one of the, as a few people who've read the book have told me, it's really one of the dramatic moments in the book, particularly. It did work out. Again, these were all moments where I felt such gratitude when something would work, as we all know in dementia care. Oh, thank goodness that worked. Now what will be next? But then he was safe. And it was just, though I cried at that moment to know he would never come home again. So upsetting even now to think about it. But he was safe and we were moving on forward. So the pandemic was rough for everybody. And especially for those of us, so many with our dementia care loved ones at home. It was a tough time. COVID was actually what took him in the end. He was already in hospice in the facility, and they had such an excellent record. But then that was the last point, and that was what actually took him in the end.
So sorry to hear that. Thank you for sharing. I think people really need to hear that message.
You're right that we're not out of it yet. And
no, it's serious. Yeah. And people, this was the most vulnerable communities were in our nursing facilities, but also the people at home and the people who are trying to care at home. And even if you were lucky enough to get caregivers to come to your house, every time they entered the door was a risk. If you could even find anybody, it was a really rough time. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. I just want to, can you ladies hear me?
Yes.
My microphone went dead, so I'm on my computer, so we'll edit this piece out, but I just want to make sure. Wow, I just want to also acknowledge, thank you for sharing that. That's so, my goodness. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
thank you. But there were bright moments too. I mean, there were bright moments, I think, for all of us in dementia caregiving. Sometimes they're funny and they're joyful. And in some ways, I really felt initially when I knew I was going to be home and I gave up my part-time job and I knew I was going to be home. It was a retirement job at that point, teaching. We were like dating. I mean, it was quite wonderful. And people who knew I was in this, I would go, this is not so bad. We're
Yeah.
close. We're doing things. We go to movies and restaurants and go to the close-in small museums. I didn't want to take a chance on losing him at LA County Museum of Art, which is huge. So we would do little small things locally, and it felt like dating. There were some very good times initially, and I was glad for that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, there were bright moments as
Mhm.
well.
Yes.
So, can you talk to us a little bit about what kind of response have you gotten to your book, to people who've read it, your readers, or other folks? Like you talked about checking in with your daughter-in-law to make sure she was okay with everything. How did she feel about the final product, and what kind of response have you gotten from other readers?
Well, again, she definitely supports me with the book. She's a librarian, so she wanted to make sure that I had it on the Libby library system. It is available through the Libby system. So that was one of her bits of encouragement. Also available through Amazon and Barnes and Noble as well. But so I'm going to backtrack on that question a little bit. I riffed off on the side there. So, the encouragement, right. I mean, from other people. I've been delighted at how much encouragement, what the response has been. People reviewing it, and social media comments and emails to me, and people who've spoken to me face to face, how many of them have a dementia issue in their family, and how often they would say that they're either recommending it to a family member or a friend or passing it on to them, which is fine to me. I didn't write this book about sales. I wrote this about sharing. And so I've been really pleased with that. And it seems like hardly a week goes by, hardly a few days goes by when I don't hear again from someone who lets me know that they're sharing this book with someone else in some way or another.
Yeah.
And that was what I had hoped for. That was my goal. So I'm very
Yeah.
pleased.
That's wonderful. And then I also wanted to ask, I know you've written other books, but this was one you chose to self-publish. Can you talk a little bit about your choice there, why you chose to do this as a self-published one, or there may be other authors out there listening and want to know what your thought process was on that. I'm curious as well.
Well, my three previous books were traditionally published. Again, one historical novel and two nonfiction. And I had an agent, and when I had the memoir, because I had to send it to my last publisher, they have to have right of refusal or whatever, or for their choice in the contract. She said, Allene, this is a memoir and you're not famous.
Oh.
So I think you need to, and she only works with larger publishers. She said, I suggest that you find a small press or self-publish.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wanted this book to get out there.
Yeah.
So rather than go through the process and trying to find a small press, I decided to go the self-publishing route.
Mhm.
So that's what I did. And I did because it was faster. I had some background in this, so I was able to find a wonderful cover illustrator. I love the cover of my book. And I knew how to work out the layout and the process of distribution. So I'm glad I went the self-publishing route because it enabled me to get this book out in a much more timely manner.
I think that's great to hear. And I hear what your publisher was saying, but you know what? The memoirs that we offer for these things, it's ordinary people. You don't have to, like if you were a famous author or a famous celebrity, your experience isn't different than ordinary people. So I think our memoir that we offer in Al's Authors is so important to people. And so I'm so glad that you did choose to self-publish. That was really great
Mhm.
for
Well, and
you.
you're offering a great service to make this available in a focused way. I think that's an awesome project that you have.
Thank you. Now that you've been through this experience, what do you wish you learned that you wish you knew earlier?
How you have to be flexible moment to moment.
Mhm.
I went into it again, because at that point, Alan was just beginning to show symptoms.
Mhm.
Being an organized person, I mean, I'd been in management, being an organized person and planning. And pretty soon you learn that you just have to be able to be flexible moment to moment. And it took me a while. I was like, why can't I work this out and make it smoother? But you do find, and that's kind of a gradual learning process, because again, initially you're bewildered sometimes as you don't know exactly what's happening.
Mhm.
But I think that if I'd gone into that just knowing, okay, yes, you need to be as organized as you can and plan, but you need to really remember that moment to moment, you have to be ready to just flex. You think you're going to go north, you're going south.
Mhm.
That was
Mhm.
such a core realization. I think that's one of my big takeaways that I wish I'd known. The other was, and it took Kathy to really push me to do this. Initially, I thought I can handle this. I don't need home care. I don't need any health care at home. I can do this. And we were talking earlier about the logistics of your own appointments, say. Only after a little bit, I realized I have to get out and make appointments for myself. And now I'm starting to worry about leaving him alone. What kind of trouble is he going to get in that could harm him or whatever? And so just the logistics, finally, I was starting to dawn on this. I didn't want him angry. He certainly didn't want a stranger in the house. And so my stepdaughter is saying, you need to start looking into this. You don't need it yet, but you need to start looking into it now.
Mhm.
So I'm
Mhm.
so glad she really pushed me on that. And she really made the point when she said, if he was well, he wouldn't want you to head towards exhaustion. He wouldn't want to wouldn't want you to head toward losing your identity, giving up all your activities. He'd want you to have the help that can get you through this. So I'm glad she pushed, because I started doing the research, finding out locally a half day, 4 hours was the minimum, finding out how that worked. And one of my great lessons in that was, turned out that a female caregiver didn't work so well for him. With a man, he felt comfortable telling his stories. That was a breakthrough.
Another concept that you made me think of that I've seen in several of the books is that the Alzheimer's is like a third party in the relationship. It kind of sounds like you were like navigating around that. I mean, it was you and him, and then there was Al. Some people even call it Al. And yeah, it's like something, another force to reckon with. And it's always changing and it's very intrusive. And then you still have your husband, and he's who he is to you. So did you feel that way?
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I felt it mostly when I had one of those little cards that you can get from the Alzheimer's
Mm-hmm.
Association, which was really helpful. Because until the pandemic, we were still going out, and on occasion, might have been a very minimal excursion, but that I had that ready to give to someone. And that also helped us. So that was kind of in a way that it made it a tangible thing to have those cards.
Right. Right.
That was the elephant in the room as I attempted to go somewhere with him.
Mm-hmm.
And we assumed, because I think this is one of the issues with so many people, I know from my support group, that you assume it's Alzheimer's. And it was only late in his dementia journey that we found out it was Lewy body dementia.
Oh, okay.
And it took a PET scan, which had not been done, because that's not a typical thing you do, to determine that there was a configuration in the way his brain was evolving that led to that conclusion.
Right.
Yeah.
So as you say, Alzheimer's is an entity, as it were. It's changing all. It's a shapeshifter.
Yeah.
In our case, it shifted into one of the other forms of dementia. Once that was realized, it also, because the way it's described in terms of the progress of dementia, there are these models that show this, you'll lose this ability and then this ability. It didn't follow the models, and it doesn't for most people. There's no one way. So there's that about Alzheimer's being kind of the elephant in the room.
And a lot of people, they don't even want to ever even reveal that, like outside of the four walls of their home. There's so many families that try to shield their loved one from other people knowing that they have this brain disease, because we have so much stigma around brain diseases, mental health, and memory loss and all of that. And so a lot of families try to keep it quiet and not reveal. And I think, like you said earlier, once somebody says, well, my husband has dementia, all of a sudden you realize how many other people in your life also have some kind of issue going on with somebody they love. So silence is not golden in this situation.
No, and it's more likely then to keep people hidden at home because you want to give
Exactly.
them, you want them to have some kind of engagement to the extent that
Yeah.
it's safe and manageable, but to sort of sequester someone in their home only and just to kind of keep it a secret, that doesn't further the benefit for either the caregiver or the dementia
Not
patient.
at all.
Yeah.
No. And your story also stresses the importance of getting a diagnosis. And why isn't the PET scan done early on so we can differentiate whatever this situation is? Because it's going to have a different each different kind of dementia has a different trajectory, and then it might alert you as to what kind of things you may encounter in the future, or explain certain things that are going
Mhm.
on. Because I know, like, Lewy body has the hallucination component, which is very extremely difficult to deal with. But if people are
Yes.
prepared and understand, then when it occurs, they're not going to like freak out and make the situation worse. But it seems like getting a diagnosis is just takes a long time. It's not always accurate. The PET scan is very expensive. We got my stepfather an MRI, but by the time we were onto it and he went there, he wasn't able to really participate in it well because he was just didn't know what was going on and he was very agitated. So they didn't get a very good images. But I mean, a PET scan would have been a great thing. But I don't know.
And I don't know to
Now we
what
have these
extent,
blood tests, so hopefully that'll be helpful.
I don't know to what extent the PET scan would have shown early on, 3 years,
Hmm.
4 years earlier.
Hmm.
I don't, if it is progressive and if there is loss, I don't know to what extent it would have been as precise. I just don't know. I'm not an expert in that
Well, that's the key words
field,
here.
but
I don't know. We don't
mhm.
know.
And it goes to your point of you can be prepared, but you have to be flexible because every day is different and we see new, oh, now he's doing this. And then tomorrow it's something else. So it's really, it keeps you on your toes. It takes up a lot of space in your mental load and what you're carrying with you all the time. I think that's why caregivers do accumulate so much stress because you are on alert a lot of the time. So,
I think that's the toughest task is being vigilant because as
yeah,
soon as you're aware of beginning to be aware of the situation you're in, the vigilance has to begin and you
Yeah.
are looking out for safety and
yeah,
a whole plethora of things.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, for sure.
but we were just talking about, well, the awareness as we go through the dementia journey. But fairly early on, there was a moment I kind of opened one of the opening chapters in the book with this. We were having breakfast and he looked at me and said, I know you're my wife, but I can't remember your name.
Mm, oh,
And I took me aback, but I'm looking like nothing, everything's normal. And it occurred to me then when we first met, we had exchanged business cards. And I said, oh, remember that time when we first met in the restaurant and we exchanged business cards and we were laughing about how our first names were so similar. You're Alan. And he goes, and you're Allene. So that brought that moment back. But 2 years later, when he didn't know who I was, it was a
yeah,
whole different thing. It wasn't a light moment.
yeah,
He didn't know, he said he wasn't married. He had no wife. He'd never been married. This was not his house. Who are you? And why are you in this? Why are we here? I got out my ID and the marriage certificate, and he called them forgeries.
mm,
So you just don't know, again, to the point of you don't know how the moment's going to change. Things can be going along okay, and suddenly you're with someone who says, "Who are you? Why are you here?" And the extreme flexibility we need when we're caregivers for a loved one with dementia is core to the journey.
Right. And I can imagine in that situation also being able to sort of some sort of compartmentalization so that you're not stuck in the emotion that you feel of, oh my God, the loss that I'm feeling right now, the hurt, and still the ability to help that person through the moment so you can get to the other side and keep them safe if they're becoming agitated because they don't know who you are. But that's so much going on that's really hard. Yeah, a lot. I moving from a heavy moment, I still want to invite you to read an excerpt for us. So if you would like to do that, we'd like to have you read.
Thank you. I will. And it's one of the lighter moments in a way, because there are. I mean, the journey covers the whole range of emotions and experiences. And it's the greatest life journey for me in my life is those years we had going through his dementia journey with him. And there'll never be anything like it. So I feel privileged that I had that experience and with all of its highs and lows. So this is from chapter 5 that I call my beloved wrecking ball. So decline in judgment is another behavior caused by dementia. In our home, it looks like we are stuck in the middle of this phase. The more kinds of devices you have around the house, the greater the chance your husband with dementia will disable them. Your loved one doesn't mean to wreck things, of course, but when you consider the lure of something to do, it makes sense. That's a basic human need. After his driver's license became invalid, Allene began casting around for opportunities to take action, to keep busy. He began looking for objects to handle and touch and repair, even if something didn't need repairing. One problem now is that because he doesn't remember recent advances in technology, he regresses to what he knew years ago. Take the TV. One day when I was not in the room, he forgot how to use the remote. He simply started pulling out cables from the back of the set, sticking them in every which way. Goodbye, satellite service. The next casualty was the automatic lawn sprinkler. The control is housed in a gray plastic box. It's attached to one wall of the garage. And when you open the lid, you see all the dials and gadgets that control the settings. Ah, so many tempting widgets to mess with. And mess with them he did, until I noticed that the front lawn and the back lawn were dying. But in the end, because this is one of my discoveries about living through the process of being a caregiver wife, there are gifts hidden in some of the most frustrating moments. An example is the departure of Allene's laptop. It had been a source of trouble for some months, ranging from when he fell for an online scam to inappropriate messages he sometimes posted on Facebook when he remembered how to use it. Then he forgot how to turn on the laptop. He couldn't find the little power button on the Mac. So the next time he became frustrated and walked away, I seized the moment, applying what is called a loving lie. I said, "Your laptop needs repair," I said as I unplugged it, packed it up, and said I would take it to the dealer. Actually, I hid it away. Later on, when he would occasionally ask where it was, I'd say, "Oh, we sent it off to the Mac repair shop. I'll check and see if it's ready." Of course, it wasn't at the shop. It was stored in the back of my closet. Soon he became accustomed to not using the computer. In time, he forgot to ask.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Very poignant.
Yeah, and really poignant and so instructive too. Talking about the loving lie, these are the things that I think people who are reading our books crave, these little pieces of how do I cope with this situation and how do I do that? And that's a really important piece to share. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. And I feel like each one of these little moments, these experiences, even though they'll not be the same for everyone, but they kind of show how one can do a workaround that computer term that means you're not fixing the problem, You're just kind of going around it. You're finding a way to circumvent it. And that's just part of the flexibility we need as caregivers in the dementia realm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's been beautiful talking with you. Is there anything else you'd like to share? Maybe we didn't ask a question you were hoping we would, and other information you wanted to share. We'd love to hear it.
Well, I was just going to add, because our butterfly journey is woven into my book. Of course, the main stories are about the experiences with dementia, but it is woven through, and it is part of the joy that we were able to experience throughout most of the years of his dementia. Though I wanted to add that I'm not recommending that other people necessarily start a butterfly garden, but I did find that being able to, if you're fortunate enough, whether it's a balcony on a condo or a little garden, if you have a little outdoor space that you can, where you have a chance to go and enjoy the fresh air, maybe smell a flower. We had fruit trees, so we had also the extra sensory experience of the oranges and the pomegranates. But if you have a little outdoor space, if you can manage it, it's one of the ways that helped us get through those years. So I hope that's one of the little takeaways maybe from the book, as well as the specific dementia stories.
Sure.
So I just
I
wanted
love
to add
that.
that.
Yeah, thank you. I really love that idea.
I have a butterfly bush in my front yard, and I absolutely love it. And we have so much activity around there, and it's great to see. So, yeah.
They really lift your spirits.
They do. And just, yeah, just different plant life. And I can't endorse that enough. Just getting outside and getting something, getting outside yourself a little bit, and you have a safe place to do that. That's a wonderful gift. So very true. Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Yeah,
So where can people find your book, and where can they find more about you on social media or the internet?
Well, my book is available on as a paperback and as an ebook. It's available through Amazon, also through barnesandnoble.com. It can be special ordered through a Barnes & Noble because it's one of their registered books. It's also on the independent bookstore network, bookstore.org, and it's on the library Libby system as well. And I'm on, let's see, my website. Most of it is just my name. My website is allenesymons.com. My email is allenesymons2@gmail.com. I'm on Facebook under my name, also on X. Let's see, LinkedIn. With Instagram, it's Allene_Symons. So I'm there. Facebook, Allene Symons as well. And I have an Allene Symons author on Facebook, but it's fairly new. So I'm just developing that now. That was a recent offshoot of my basic Facebook page. So we all need to be out there on social media if we have a book, especially a self-published book.
Yeah.
That's something we learn as well.
Yeah.
The
All
publishing
right.
world. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. We'll put all that information in your show notes, and it'll be on our website with your blog post. So listeners, if they need more information, they can certainly visit allsauthors.com and find Allene and look at the show notes, because we're going to put it there.
Thank you. This has been
You're
such a
welcome.
pleasure to be on your show. Thank you for your time and your thoughts.
Thank
It's been great to talk with you. Thank you so much, Allene. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Marianne with exciting news. Alls Authors has published a brand new anthology, Poetry for the Dementia Journey, now available in ebook and paperback through Amazon. Within its pages, you'll discover a variety of voices writing about the diversity of dementia care experiences, caring for a mother or father or spouse, witnessing the decline of a sibling, reflections on the time before the diagnosis, the years of care, and the aftermath. Poetry provides us with a meaningful way to explore our experience and emotions regarding dementia and to express ourselves when we encounter the many different joys and dilemmas caregiving can bring. You'll find details on how to order the book in the show notes. Please remember to leave a review on the book sales page once you've read it. Reviews do help boost a book's visibility and helps readers find it. Thank you for your support of our efforts to erase the silence and stigma that often accompany a dementia diagnosis.
Caregiving is a challenge, whether your person has dementia or not. Finding helpful tips and learning new strategies from people in the know is critical. That's why we at Owls Authors love the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast from Elizabeth Miller, who also happens to be an Owls author. Elizabeth speaks from experience and has important and often fun conversations with other caregiving experts and professionals. And we appreciate learning tips on self-care, discovering new resources, and feeling empowered to support ourselves as caregivers. You can find the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast wherever you download your favorite podcasts, or visit the website happyhealthycaregiver.com.